I have to be honest with you. When I first saw Edith Wharton on our schedule for this deep dive, my brain immediately went to a very specific, slightly dusty place.
Let me guess. High school English class.
Exactly. I'm thinking intensely uncomfortable corsets. I'm thinking of, tea sets and people sitting in drawing rooms, not saying what they actually mean.
That is the popular perception, the grand dame of American letters, the chronicler of the Gilded Age. It's a very persistent image.
Right. It feels very, I don't know, beige, very polite. But then I started digging into the research stack we have here, the biographies, the letters, the war records, and I realized that the high school English version of Edith Wharton is basically a cover story.
A disguise.
It's a total disguise.
It is a very effective disguise, and it's one that, in some ways, she actually helped construct. But you are absolutely right. The popular image captures maybe 10% of who she actually was.
And it misses the most interesting 90%.
Completely.
That is exactly what we are going to unpack today. Because the woman I found in these files is not just a society writer. She's a survivalist. She's a war hero. She's a divorcee in an era when that was social suicide.
Unthinkable for a woman of her class.
And this is the part that really got me. She's the literal definition of the Joneses everyone is trying to keep up with.
That is a great place to start. It's one of those details that sounds like a fun fact, but it's actually central to her whole story.
The idiom itself.
Yeah. The phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, is so embedded in our culture we don't even think about it. But in this case, it is biographical. Edith was born Edith Newbold Jones.
Wow.
And her father's family, the Joneses, were so wealthy, so socially dominant in New York that they are the most likely source for that idiom.
So when we say she was an insider, we don't just mean she had money. We mean she was the standard. She was the finish line.
She was the absolute apex. I mean, you look at her family tree, she was related to the Astors, the Rensselaers. Her cousin was the Mrs. Astor, Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, the woman who literally decided who was in or out of New York society.
So Edith wasn't writing about the elite from the outside, pressing her nose against the glass?
No. She was inside the glass, she was the specimen in the jar, and she was taking notes.
And that is the mission of this deep dive. We want to move beyond the tea parties and look at the tension between this insanely restrictive, ultra-wealthy upbringing and the woman who eventually just savages that entire world in her writing.
The central contradiction of her life.
Exactly. We need to figure out how a girl who was literally forbidden from reading novels until she got married, ended up becoming the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction.
It's a massive contradiction. And to understand it, we have to look at the Jones reality. We have to go back to the beginning.
Back to 1862.
1862, the height of the American Civil War. Edith is born in New York.
Now, usually, when you read a biography of someone born in 1862, the war is the backdrop. It's everything. But in the Jones family records we've got here, it's almost like it wasn't happening.
The silence is deafening, isn't it? The Civil War was tearing the country apart, but in Edith's old New York, it was treated as something, vulgar, something that was happening elsewhere to other people.
The only way the war really impacted the Jones family was economically.
Which brings us to a detail that I think perfectly encapsulates their privilege. It's almost comical.
The currency depreciation.
Right. So the war caused the American dollar to depreciate against European currencies. So for the Jones family, living in New York suddenly became expensive relative to their assets.
So what's the solution? Do they tighten their belts? Do they buy fewer carriages?
Of course not. They tack up the entire household servants, luggage, the whole operation, and they move to Europe for 6 years.
It's the ultimate 1% problem. Oh dear, the dollar is down, so we simply must spend the next half-decade touring France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. It's just wild.
It sounds absurd to us, but that decision was foundational for Edith. Think about the timing. She is 4 years old when they leave and 10 when they return.
Those are crucial developmental years.
Absolutely. So while other American children are dealing with the aftermath of the Civil War, Edith is walking through the ruins of the Roman Forum. She's hearing French, German, and Italian spoken around her every single day.
She became fluent in all of them, right?
Completely fluent. She just absorbed them. She was seeing art and architecture that simply didn't exist in the America of that time. It gave her this perspective that was so much broader than the narrow strip of Manhattan Island she came from.
But, and here is the tension, while she is getting this cosmopolitan exposure, She's also being groomed.
Constantly. The marriage market grooming.
So this wasn't an education for her own enrichment.
Not at all. Her education, which was handled by tutors and governesses, wasn't designed to make her a scholar or an intellectual. It was designed to make her a catch.
What does that even mean in practical terms?
It means the goal was polish, not depth. She needed to know how to enter a room correctly, how to make pleasant, meaningless conversation, how to dress, how to manage a household. Her mind was secondary. Her appearance and her manners were primary.
But the sources imply she was fighting this right from the start.
Oh, she hated it. She found the fashions of the time, the bustles, the layers, the corsets, physically oppressive. She later wrote about feeling suffocated by them.
And the etiquette.
Superficial, pointless. Here she was, this intellectually hungry child, and she was being told that her only real value lay in being decorative and agreeable.
Yeah, and this brings us to that big restriction I mentioned in the intro. I need to circle back to this because it sounds fake, but the biographers are adamant about it. Her mother, Lucretia Jones, forbade her from reading novels.
Until she was married, it was a hard and fast rule.
What was the logic there? Was it a religious thing? I don't get it.
It wasn't religious so much as it was about social morality. In that specific slice of upper crust society, novels were viewed as dangerous for unmarried young women.
Dangerous hell.
They dealt with emotions, with passion, with messy human situations. The fear was that a novel might give a young girl ideas about romance or, personal fulfillment that didn't align with a strategic marriage alliance.
So Lucretia wanted a daughter who was compliant, not one whose head was filled with romantic fantasies from books.
Precisely. She was trying to control the narrative of Edith's life by controlling the narratives she consumed.
But this backfired spectacularly.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can ban novels, but you can't ban the library.
And that is the great irony of her childhood. She had access to her father's library, which was extensive and full of serious books, so she couldn't read the popular fluff of the day. She couldn't read the romances.
Instead, she read
the quote-unquote safe books, which turned out to be the classics, philosophy, and science.
Safe meaning Darwin.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine? She's a teenager reading these legitimate intellectual heavyweights. She's reading Plutarch, Dante, Milton. But crucially, as you said, she is reading the scientists and philosophers of the 19th century. She is reading Charles Darwin. She is reading Herbert Spencer. She's reading Nietzsche.
I want to pause on that because I think it explains so much about her later writing. If you are a teenage girl in a corset, training to be a debutante, but your brain is steeped in the origin of species, how does that change how you see the world around you?
It changes everything. It's not just about accumulating facts. It gives her a framework. It introduces the concept of determinism and naturalism.
The idea that we're all just products of our environment.
Exactly. If you read Darwin, you start to see human beings not as autonomous heroes of their own stories, but as organisms reacting to their environment. You see survival of the fittest. You see that if an animal doesn't adapt to its specific habitat, it dies.
So when she looks around a Gilded Age ballroom in New York, she isn't seeing a party.
No.
She's seeing an ecosystem.
She is seeing a tribal ritual. She's seeing predators and prey. She's observing mating displays. This is why her later novels, like The House of Mirth, feel so different from other books of the time. They feel almost clinical.
Right. She dissects her characters like a scientist pinning a butterfly to a board.
She does. She looks at Lily Bart, the protagonist of that novel, and she asks, does this organism have the specific tools required to survive in this very specific, very hostile environment?
And the answer is a brutal no.
Oh, brutal no. That clinical detachment. You're right. It comes from the library. It comes directly from the fact that her mother forced her to read science instead of romance.
So the restriction actually gave her the analytical tools to dismantle the very society that restricted her.
It's a perfect, tragic irony.
But before she could write those books, she had to deal with this intense internal urge to tell stories. The research mentions a childhood ritual she had called making up. Can we visualize that? Because it sounds almost trance-like.
It was obsessive. We aren't just talking about a kid playing pretend. This was something else. From a very young age, before she could even properly read, she would grab a book, often holding it upside down.
Upside down?
Yeah. And she would pace back and forth in her room, turning the pages frantically while chanting a story out loud at high speed. It was a torrent of words.
And her parents didn't think this was, cute.
They were disturbed by it. They would beg her to stop. It was like she was leaving reality, entering some other state. And in a way, she was.
She was building a mental fortress.
That's a great way to put it. She was creating a world where she had control, Unlike the real world where she was just Pussy Jones, the little girl who had to sit still and look pretty.
Ugh. Pussy Jones. I can't believe that was her nickname.
It was, and she hated it. It infantilized her, but the making up was her escape. The problem was, as she got older and actually tried to write these stories down, the suppression from her family became much more active.
She tried to write a novel at 11, right?
She did, a very ambitious move for an 11-year-old, and she made the critical mistake of showing it to her mother.
And Lucretia's reaction was, what?
It was just devastating. The story goes that the novel began with the character saying something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I have nothing to say."
Okay.
And Lucretia looked at it and said, coldly, that the book was absurd because in polite society, one always has something to say, even if it's meaningless small talk.
Wait, she critiqued the etiquette of the characters, not the plot, not the writing.
Exactly. It was a complete dismissal of the entire creative act. It was a slap in the face. It basically told Edith, your world of fiction is invalid because it doesn't follow my rules of social behavior.
Quashed is the word the biographers use.
It crushed her confidence in writing fiction for years. She pivoted to poetry because poetry was seen as slightly more elevated and abstract, less dangerous.
But even that was a problem for them.
A huge problem. In their circle, having your name in print was considered vulgar. It was common. It meant you were working for money, which was something only the lower classes did. A lady's name should only appear in print 3 times: when she's born, when she marries, and when she dies.
So she had to operate in stealth mode. A secret writer.
Completely. She published poems anonymously. She used pseudonyms. At one point, she even used the name of a friend's father, E.A. Washburn, to translate a German poem. She was hiding her talent like it was a shameful secret.
But she couldn't stop entirely. I love the detail about Fast and Loose. She wrote a novella at 15, in secret.
In 1877, yes, it was a secret project. And even at 15, she was already satirizing her world. It was a mock society novel. She was making fun of the very debutante ritual she was being forced to participate in, but she had to keep it locked away in a drawer.
Because now we are entering the real danger zone for her, the debutante years. From 1880 to 1890, the pressure is on.
The clock is ticking. She comes out in 1879. That's the formal presentation to society. It meant she could finally put her hair up and wear dresses that bared her shoulders.
It was a signal to the market.
That's exactly what it was. It said, this merchandise is now available for inspection and purchase.
And she almost made a match early on. Henry Lyden Stevens.
This is a pivotal and very painful moment. She was 20. He was 23. The Stevens family was wealthy. They were in the hotel business. But the Jones family disapproved.
Not old money enough.
Exactly. A lot of snobbery involved. But despite that, they got engaged. The wedding was planned.
And then disaster.
The engagement was broken off the very month they were supposed to marry.
Do we know why? What happened?
We don't have the smoking gun letter, but the consensus among biographers is that the families interfered, or perhaps Henry himself got cold feet. Maybe he realized Edith was simply too intellectual, too intense for him.
But the why matters less than the what, I guess.
I think so. In 1882, for a woman of her class, a broken engagement was a massive public humiliation. It suggested there was something wrong with her. It damaged her market value.
It must have felt like she had failed the one and only job she was raised to do.
Precisely. And many scholars believe this searing humiliation is what fueled the darkness and the cynicism in her writing about marriage. She knew firsthand what it felt like to be inspected, approved, and then suddenly rejected like faulty goods.
So she's back on the shelf, so to speak. 3 years pass. And then she marries Teddy, Edward Robbins Wharton.
Teddy Wharton. On paper, he was a perfect solution. He was 12 years older. He was a gentleman from a good Boston family, same social class. It was a safe, respectable match to stop the whispering and get her married off.
But in reality?
In reality, it was a mismatch of catastrophic proportions. And we need to sit with this for a moment. This wasn't just a bad marriage where they argued over finances or whatever. This was a slow-motion tragedy that lasted for 28 years.
28 years?
Yes.
That is a lifetime.
It is. Teddy was, by all accounts, a nice enough man initially. He was a sportsman. He loved dogs. He loved hunting and fishing. But he had zero intellectual curiosity. Absolutely none.
So you have Edith, who is reading Nietzsche and corresponding with scholars.
And she's married to a man whose main topics of conversation are the weather, his horses, and his travel plans. There was just a void, a complete lack of intellectual or emotional connection.
That sounds boring, but manageable. People live with that.
Sure.
But it got
What?
much worse than just boredom.
So much worse. Teddy suffered from severe mental health issues. Today, we would likely diagnose him with bipolar disorder or severe manic depression. As the years went on, his condition deteriorated.
How did that manifest?
He would spiral into deep catatonic depressions where he couldn't function for weeks at a time. Then he would have these wild manic episodes.
The notes mention embezzlement. That's more than just a mood swing.
Yes. In his manic phases, he would spend money wildly, uncontrollably. He embezzled a significant amount of money from Edith's own trust funds to buy a house and set up a mistress in an apartment in Boston.
So he wasn't just sick, he was destroying their financial stability and publicly humiliating her.
Exactly. So picture this situation. You are arguably one of the most brilliant women of your generation. You are trapped in a house with a man who is mentally unraveling, stealing your money, and sleeping with other women. And because of the laws and the social rules of the time, you cannot leave.
Divorce is unthinkable.
Utterly unthinkable. It creates this intense pressure cooker. And we see it in her health. She was dealing with chronic asthma, nausea, severe fatigue, all psychosomatic symptoms of living in a trap.
And this is where we see her start to channel that frustrated, trapped energy into the only thing she could control.
Her environment,
Houses.
architecture, absolutely.
Most people know her as a novelist, but she was a design pioneer first. Her first major published book wasn't a novel at all. It was The Decoration of Houses in 1897.
And this wasn't a book about, how to arrange throw pillows. It was a manifesto, a declaration of war on the Gilded Age aesthetic.
What did she hate so much about it?
The clutter, the heavy velvet drapes, the dark wood, the bric-a-brac everywhere. She felt it was visually and intellectually stifling. Her book argued for classical principles: proportion, logic, symmetry, light.
Proportion is the good breeding of architecture. That's the quote that stood out to me.
It's a telling quote, isn't it? She was trying to impose order and good breeding on her physical environment because her emotional environment with Teddy was pure chaos. If she couldn't fix her marriage, by God, she was going to fix the walls.
And she took this philosophy to its ultimate conclusion with the Mount.
Her estate in Lenox, Massachusetts. She designed it from the ground up in 1902. It's a beautiful place, a classic French and Italian-style manor. But if you look at the floor plan, it is a biography written in rooms.
How so?
It is designed to separate her from Teddy. She created a suite for herself that was essentially a fortress within the house. It had her bedroom, her boudoir, her library, her bath. And it was separated from the rest of the house by a series of doors that could be shut and locked.
This is where she wrote.
This was her sanctuary. The famous images of her writing are from this space. She would sit up in bed in the morning, writing longhand on page after page and just dropping them on the floor for her secretary to come in and collect.
So the house wasn't just a home. It was a machine for writing.
It was a machine for survival. She built a sanctuary where she could be Edith Wharton, the writer, safely walled off from the misery of being Mrs. Teddy Wharton, the wife of the manic depressive.
It's heartbreaking when you frame it that way. She built a perfect house to contain a broken life.
And that tension between the perfect, orderly facade of the house and the misery inside it is the central engine of her fiction. She lived it at the Mount for years before she wrote it into books like The Age of Innocence.
So let's talk about that writing, because she starts late. She doesn't publish her first novel until she is 40 years old.
Which is incredibly late for a debut author, but you have to think, she had been storing up all this observation, all this analysis, all this frustration for decades. So when she finally started, it was like a dam breaking.
The productivity was amazing.
Extraordinary. Over the next 35 years, she wrote 15 novels, 7 novellas, and 85 short stories. She was incredibly prolific.
And she hits big almost immediately with The House of Mirth in 1905.
That was the breakout. It became a massive bestseller. It established her as the definitive chronicler of New York society, but it also proved she wasn't writing pleasant romances. It's a tragedy. A brutal one. It's about a woman who tries to play the social game and is destroyed by it.
Then you get Ethan Frome in 1911, the one everyone reads in school.
Right, the sledding into the tree book, it's so grim, but it showed her range. It proved she wasn't just a society lady who could only write about what she knew. She could write about poverty, isolation, and rural despair with just as much authority. It proved she was a serious artist.
But the crown jewel, at least in terms of public recognition, is The Age of Innocence. She writes it in 1920, she wins the Pulitzer Prize for it in 1921, and she's the first woman to ever win it for fiction.
A historic moment, a huge achievement. But And we have to get into the weeds here. The story behind that Pulitzer win is messy. And it is a perfect example of how the male establishment viewed her versus who she actually was.
This is the jury versus the board controversy.
Exactly. So the way the Pulitzer Prize worked then, and still does, is you have a fiction jury that reads the books and selects the winner. Then you have an advisory board at Columbia University that officially approves it.
Okay.
The jury that year actually voted for Sinclair Lewis's book, Main Street.
Which was a huge deal at the time.
Yeah.
A really biting satire of small-town America.
Very modern, very cynical. The jury loved it. But the advisory board at Columbia was led by this very conservative, very stuffy president named Nicholas Murray Butler. He hated Main Street. He thought it was un-American and nasty.
So what did he do?
He wanted a book that upheld the wholesome atmosphere of American life. So he strong-armed the board, they overturned the jury's decision, and they gave the prize to Edith Wharton for the Age of Innocence instead.
Wait. They gave it to her because they thought she was the wholesome choice.
They thought she was safe. They saw a book about old New York, about good manners and wealthy families, and they thought, nostalgia. This is a nice, respectable book.
That is hilarious, because if you actually read The Age of Innocence, it is not a nice book at all. It is a savage critique of that very society.
It is a devastating book. It's about a society that strangles human emotion and individuality in the name of keeping up appearances. It is about the quiet cruelty of conformity. The board completely missed the point.
So they gave the award to the Grande Dame, not realizing she was secretly holding a scalpel.
Precisely. They saw the corset, not the mind behind it.
This all connects back to her mother, doesn't it? The way she critiques that world that feels so personal.
Oh, deeply personal. The biographer, Hermione Lee, has this incredible line. She calls Wharton's fiction one of the most lethal acts of revenge ever taken by a writing daughter. And it's true. Lucretia Jones, Edith's mother, is everywhere in the fiction, but she's disguised. She is the cold mother, the superficial mother, the mother who cares more about what the neighbors think than about her own child's happiness. It's a recurring character type.
But in her autobiography, A Backward Glance, which she wrote late in life, Edith doesn't mention any of this.
Not a single word of it. In the autobiography, her mother is presented respectfully. The difficulties of her marriage to Teddy are glossed over. The passionate affair she had is completely invisible. She maintained the public Jones mask in her official life story while putting the raw, bleeding truth into the novels.
Okay, speaking of raw truth, we need to pivot to the chapter of her life that completely shattered my perception of her, World War I.
This is the untold story for most people, and honestly, it is arguably the most impressive part of her entire life.
So set the scene for us. It's 1914. Edith is living in her fashionable apartment on the Rue de Varenne in Paris. She's finally divorced Teddy the year before, in 1913, after a long and painful process.
So she's free. She's 52 years old. She's famous. She's rich.
The war breaks out. The Germans are marching toward Paris. What does everyone else in her position do?
They flee. It was a mass panic. The wealthy expats in Paris, and there were thousands of them, Americans and Brits, were fleeing. They were packing their trunks and bribing their way onto steamships back to New York or London.
And logically, Edith should have been with them. Why stay? She has a house in the Berkshires. She has more than enough money.
Yeah.
Why would you stay in a war zone?
That's the key question, and the answer is complex. She loved France. She truly believed that France was the guardian of civilization and that it was under attack by barbarians. But more than that, I think she finally found a situation that was big enough for her talents, a crisis that demanded everything she had to give.
And she didn't just stay. She went to work.
And I don't mean she knit socks for soldiers. She became the CEO of a massive humanitarian aid operation.
Let's look at the scale of this.
Yeah.
Because the notes here are just staggering.
It started almost immediately, August 1914. The French economy collapses overnight. All the wealthy people leave Paris, which means all their seamstresses, maids, and cooks are instantly unemployed. They're on the streets, starving.
So what does Edith do?
She opens a workroom. She turns it into a business.
A business, not a charity.
A massive operation. She finds a space, she gets donations of sewing machines, and she employs these women to sew clothes for the hospitals and for the army. She pays them a living wage, she feeds them, and she creates a self-sustaining business model. It wasn't a handout, it was employment. And by all accounts, she ran it with an iron fist. She demanded quality.
And then the refugees came.
When Germany invaded Belgium, a tidal wave of refugees hit Paris. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people arriving with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The French government was completely overwhelmed.
And Edith steps into the breach.
She creates the American Hostels for Refugees. She fundraises like a maniac, mostly from her rich friends back in the States, and she starts building an entire infrastructure.
What did that entail? What was she actually doing?
Everything. She found them apartments. She set up cafeterias to feed thousands of people a day. She set up a free grocery store. She set up a medical clinic. She even created a lost and found system for their luggage. She was managing the logistics for thousands upon thousands of displaced people.
And the Children of Flanders Committee. This is the one that really gets me.
This was a project very close to her heart. This was specific to the children, the orphans. She took personal responsibility for nearly 900 of them.
900 kids.
900 children. She had to find them beds, schools, clothes, medical care. She was fundraising huge amounts of money. The records show that in 1915, she was raising over $100,000 for her charities. That's millions in today's money.
This is the woman who grew up being told she wasn't allowed to read novels because it might upset her delicate constitution. And now she is managing a refugee crisis that would stress out a modern government agency.
It shows you her genius for organization. The same mind that could structure a perfect, intricate novel or design a perfectly symmetrical house could also organize a complex logistical supply chain in the middle of a war. She was an absolute powerhouse.
But she didn't just stay in the office in Paris. This is the General Wharton part of the story. She went to the front.
She did. This is what sets her apart from almost everyone else. She used her high-level connections in the French government, and she knew everyone, to get a military pass. This was unheard of for a civilian, let alone a woman.
And she made 5 separate journeys to the front lines in 1915.
We are talking actual trenches.
Actual war zones, the Argonne,
Uh,
Gros Run,
yeah.
the Vosges Mountains. She was in a car, often with her friend Walter Berry, driving through villages that had been shelled into rubble just hours before. She was within earshot of the machine guns. She describes the noise of the artillery as incessant.
Oh,
Why did she go? Was it just thrill-seeking?
I don't think so. I think it was an act of witnessing. She felt the world, especially America, which hadn't entered the war yet, needed to see what was happening. She viewed the Germans as barbarians destroying civilization, and she wanted to report back.
And she did. She wrote a series of best-selling articles called Fighting France.
She wrote them to shame Americans into joining the fight. She was a propagandist for the Allied cause. She described herself, in her own words, as a rabid imperialist.
She was not neutral.
Not even slightly. She was fiercely pro-French. She even edited a charity book called The Book of the Homeless, and she got all these famous people, Henry James, Joseph Conrad, Jean Cocteau, to contribute. And she got Theodore Roosevelt to write an introduction that was basically a call to arms for America.
There is an anecdote in the notes about a French officer telling her to keep her head down.
Yes, I love that story. She
Yeah.
was near the front, and an officer warned her about snipers in the area. And Edith apparently just looked at him completely unfazed and said, "I have never known how to be afraid."
I have never known how to be afraid. I mean, looking at her life, standing up to her mother, surviving that marriage, going through a public divorce, staying in Paris when the bombs were falling, I kind of believe her.
The French government believed her too. In 1916, they appointed her a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor. That is the highest civilian and military honor in France. She wasn't just a writer to them, she was a genuine war hero.
It really reframes the Age of Innocence, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When she sits down to write that book in 1920, she has just come through 4 years of absolute hell. She has seen the industrial-scale destruction of Europe, and she writes a book about 1870s New York dinner parties.
It puts the whole idea of nostalgia in a very different light. When she looks back at old New York from the vantage point of 1920, she isn't just missing the pretty dresses. She's looking at a world that was safe, yes, but also incredibly naive and trivial. A world that worried about using the wrong fork, while she now knows that the entire world can literally blow up.
It explains the profound sadness in that book. It's not nostalgia. It's a eulogy for a world that is gone forever.
Exactly. Dead and gone.
So the war ends. She is a decorated hero. She never moves back to America, does she?
No. She returns once, briefly, in 1923 to accept an honorary degree from Yale University. But she felt completely out of place. America had changed into the Jazz Age.
Flappers, speakeasies.
Right. It was loud and fast, and she didn't recognize it and frankly didn't like it very much. France was her home. She had crossed the Atlantic over 60 times in her life, but after the war, she stayed put.
And she sets up this incredible expat life for herself, the gardens, the homes. It sounds idyllic.
She bought two beautiful homes, Pavillon Colombe, which was a villa near Paris, and Saint-Clair-du-Vieux Château, a restored convent in the south of France with amazing gardens, and she created her own court.
Yeah.
She surrounded herself with the cream of the European and American intelligentsia.
Who is in this inner circle?
Henry James was her closest friend for years until his death. André Gide, the French writer, Jean Cocteau. Sinclair Lewis, funnily enough, became a friend. She was the queen bee, and people came to pay homage.
But not everyone fit in. We have to talk about the F. Scott Fitzgerald story.
Oh, the failed encounter. It is legendary. It tells you everything you need to know about her in her later years.
So Fitzgerald was the young hotshot, the voice of the jazz age.
Right, and he was invited to have tea with Wharton, the voice of the Gilded Age. He was completely terrified of her.
As he should be. She's intimidating.
So he gets drunk for courage before he goes, which was a bad start, and then he decides he's going to try to shock her. He's going to tell a scandalous story to prove he's sophisticated.
What was the story?
He told this long, rambling story about an American couple who accidentally ended up living in a brothel in Paris for a while. And he finishes the story thinking he's just scandalized the great grande dame.
What was her reaction?
Edith just looked at him with this icy, completely bored expression and said, "But, Mr. Fitzgerald, you haven't told us what they did in the evenings?"
Mm-hmm.
She completely dismissed him, like a naughty schoolboy trying to get a rise out of his teacher. It crushed him. It showed that she wasn't some pearl-clutching Victorian grandmother. She was tougher and more worldly than he could ever be.
She had seen the trenches of Verdun. A story about a brothel wasn't going to shock her.
Not even a little bit.
But we also know now, thanks to her private papers, that her own life wasn't as nun-like as people assumed for decades. For years, critics called her repressed because of the famously sexless marriage to Teddy.
That was the standard reading of her, all mind, no passion.
But then her papers were unsealed in 1968.
And we met Morton Fullerton.
The affair. The secret lover.
This changes the reading of her work completely. Around 1908, while she was still married to Teddy, but their relationship was falling apart, she met Fullerton. He was a journalist for the Times in London. He was handsome, charming, intellectual, and sexually experienced in a way Teddy Wharton clearly was not.
And they had a passionate, intense affair.
A very real, very physical affair. We have the letters. We even have a fragment of a pornographic story she started writing. It was an intellectual and a physical awakening for her in her mid-40s.
So when she writes about forbidden passion in her novels, she isn't just guessing.
She isn't inventing it from books. She lived it. She wrote a poem called Terminus about a night they spent together in the Charing Cross Hotel in London. It is incredibly erotic and tender. It proved that Edith Wharton wasn't just a brain in a jar. She was a woman who desired and was desired.
It's tragic that she had to hide it her whole life, though.
She had to. It would have been a career-ending, society-ending scandal. But the experience unlocked something in her writing. Without Fullerton, we probably don't get the emotional depth of a book like The Age of Innocence.
She died in 1937 in France. She was 75.
She died of a stroke at her home near Paris. And the funeral. This is the detail that always stays with me. She was buried in the Cimetière des Gonards in Versailles.
Which is fitting for a queen of letters.
It is. But she wasn't just buried as a writer. The French government made sure she was buried with all the honors owed a war hero.
Ooh, really?
Yes. Members of the French government were there. War veterans were there to pay their respects. They remembered what she did in 1914.
That is the legacy, isn't it? It's not just the books on the shelf. It's the life.
It's the totality of it. She took the raw materials she was given, this immense wealth, these suffocating restrictions, a disastrous marriage, and she didn't just accept them. She re-engineered them into a life of her own design.
She designed her life the way she designed the Mount.
Yeah.
With intention.
Precisely. She built Edith Wharton, the literary icon and war hero, out of the wreckage of Pussy Jones, the debutante who wasn't allowed to read.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave the listener with a final thought. We've talked a lot about The Age of Innocence. It's her most famous book. We see the movie posters with the beautiful costumes. We think of it as a romance, maybe a tragedy.
It is very seductive to view it that way. The surfaces are so beautiful.
But knowing what we know now about the no novels rule, about the mental prison of her marriage, about the absolute horror of the trenches she witnessed, I want to propose something. Is The Age of Innocence actually a horror story?
That is a provocative framing. I like it.
Think about it. It's a story about a polite, smiling, beautiful society that slowly and methodically suffocates anyone who tries to be real, to feel a genuine emotion. It's a world where form matters more than life itself.
A ghost story where the people are the ghosts, trapped in ritual.
Exactly. So when she wrote that in 1920, looking back after the devastation of the war, was she really mourning old New York? Or was she performing an autopsy? Was she dissecting a corpse to show us what killed it?
Was she showing us a world that deserved to die because it cared more about which fork you used than whether your soul was alive or dead?
It forces you to ask, what is the true cost of conformity? And for Edith Wharton, who paid that cost for the first half of her life before finally violently breaking free, I think she wanted us to see the blood on the ballroom floor.
A chilling thought.
Something to think about the next time you see a picture of a Gilded Age ballroom. It looks pretty, but for Edith Wharton, it was a battlefield. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
A pleasure, as always.